really busy. But I would like to take the time to introduce my friend and colleague, Peter Stern. Come on, Peter, come next to me here. Peter got to know back in 2011 when I actually joined Carnegie Mellon after my entrepreneurial career. Together, along with Jonathan Kaplan, the nominee to be the ambassador to Singapore, we started a thing called Open Field Entrepreneurs Fund together, and we funded over 50 CMU startups over about a 4 or 5 year period. That program has kind of morphed into what we now call the Venture Bridge program, and we've done, almost as many investments in those companies right now. Peter is a charter member of the Schwartz Center Advisory Board, and on that board, of which there are many luminaries, Peter has definitely been the most helpful to me along the way because he likes to lean in.
That can't possibly be true.
And do things like that. So Peter is a very accomplished entrepreneur himself. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of Voyant Photonics, which is a lidar on a chip company, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions any of you have about that. But I actually learned about Peter back in the 1990s by reading, Forbes magazine, Fortune magazine articles. He and his colleagues created the real-time online trading industry through two companies, one called Daytech Online and the other was Island ECN. Daytech Online is currently TD Ameritrade, so it's a real company.
No, I think I bought by Schwab.
Oh, he got by Schwab.
Yeah, it's all Schwab now.
Okay, Schwab. There we go. See, consolidation happens. So Peter certainly has a tremendous amount of experience in being both an entrepreneur and an investor. He's a venture partner at LDV, which is a vision fund based in New York City. So he's been on both sides of the table a lot, and he's going to share with you his wisdom today. So please join me in welcoming Peter Stern.
Thank you, Dave. Woo, woo. All right, tough crowd. All right, so obviously it's not a big population, but how many of you want to raise money from venture capitalists? Oh, like everybody. Okay, great. So obviously, thanks for the great introduction, Dave. I'm sure at least half of that is true. One thing that I see that I've seen over the years, especially from places like CMU, is a deep misunderstanding of how to raise money from other people, which is natural because when would you learn that? How would you know that? It's not something that people should know. So what I'm here to, the thing that I find most helpful in talking to early entrepreneurs is the how to raise money, some pitfalls in how to raise money from VCs really. There we go. Okay, so Dave already gave the intro about me. CMU alum, double E in public policy, a long time ago. I did not go to college thinking I should create startups. It never really dawned on me to do that. A lot of my friends started startups right out of college. I had nothing to do with any of that. And it turns out I created about 5 startups, 2 dismal failures, 2 amazing successes, 1 moderate success, and then a couple other things that I'm not sure I can call it startups, so I had to reduce the number. I've been on boards of other companies. I've taken over other companies. I have a lot of, I've been busy. But the reason you should listen to me now is nothing to do with that. You should listen to me now because I also directly invest in many startups over the years, or have directly invested in many startups over the years. And I'm like an active venture partner in 2 different places, as well as helping Dave with OFEF many years ago. So I've heard thousands of pitches. I've watched how the investment process works for companies, of a wide variety of companies in a wide variety of industries. And so everything I'm going to tell you comes out of those lessons. I'll also point out that anything that I say that you think is not true, or you couldn't possibly execute on it, well, don't. Because one of the problems I find at these meetings is some famous person, I'm not famous, I'm not saying that, but some famous important person, Elon Musk or somebody will say, oh, do this. Or Peter Thiel does this a lot. He'll say, do this. And that's great if you're Peter Thiel, but does it work for you? You have to decide that on your own. So if I say something that doesn't work for you, just ignore me. So the key takeaway from this talk, the key thing I'm telling you is, I know you'll go to their websites, you'll hear their talks, we like to fund founders with a vision for changing the world, blah, blah, blah. We like to empower stories. And there's so many different ways of saying this, but all the investors really want is a riskless win. That's all they want. No matter what the wording, I don't care how much they talk about all this stuff. We just want to enable great entrepreneurs, whatever. It's just marketing. It's just marketing. They want the riskless win. A riskless win is, this is the perfect pitch. You give me $1 million today and guaranteed I will give you $3 million next Tuesday or 2 Tuesdays now from a year. That's the riskless win. Of course, it's hard to execute on a riskless win. Why would you even take anyone's money for a riskless win? But that's really what they're looking for. So as close as you can get your pitch to a riskless win, regardless of how you're trying to match it to the marketing spiel on their websites or what they say, that's how you win. Now remember, investors are not your mom. They're not your customers. What you tell them is not necessarily what you would tell a customer or a new employee or somebody you're trying to win over. It's a different message. They'll never give you honest feedback. It's not in their best interest, because even if they think you're like, your idea is totally stupid and you're a waste of time, maybe next time you'll be in the door with a better idea and a better team, and they don't want you to exclude them because they give you honest feedback. So it's like talking about a friend's girlfriend or something. Like there's no win in giving honest feedback. So you just don't do it as an investor. I do it, which makes me a terrible VC, but most of the time you don't get honest feedback. And so there are tricks for how to get honest feedback out of VC that I'll go over. And yeah, remember, they want to be your friend forever for the reasons I just explained. Now, this is what investors don't want to hear. Don't waste your time saying any of this to an investor. Don't say how smart you are, how smart your team is. Don't tell me how complicated and sophisticated you are or your product is. Like, these are not useful things. First-time entrepreneurs think it is. If he just knows how smart I am, he'll invest. But everyone they see is really smart, right? And if you're really smart, you don't say it. You just let them figure it out from the amazing, innovative, smart stuff you're saying. And if what you're saying is so complicated that nobody can understand it, then they're thinking, wow, I don't have time. This could be amazing, but it's going to take me a long time to understand this. I'm going to have to hire some experts. My due diligence process is expensive. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'm going to find an idea where the due diligence process is not so expensive. So I know technical people from technical universities, people with advanced degrees, they want to explain everything technical. They want to make it sound really complicated. My advice is don't. Explain it to, I can't say explain it to your mom. I've never met your mom, with one exception in this room, but explain it to my mom. I'll introduce you to my mom. If you explain it to my mom, that is a great VC pitch. This is a pitch that's evolved over the years, but I think David Bornstein wrote this book a decade ago about social entrepreneurs, but he had a lot of interesting ideas in there about risk-taking. This is not really about how to raise money for VCs, but it's something to understand is that, you know, being an entrepreneur is lonely and stupid, and I would strongly urge you to not do it and get a real job. But if you do it, you're going to have to be faced with a lot of risk, a lot of challenges, a lot of having to make perfect plans from imperfect data. And these are just things to be aware of when you're talking to VCs and thinking about how to explain your plans, because a lot of people either over-explain the risks or don't acknowledge them at all. And there's a balance in how you accommodate risk. Well, I'll talk about risk, talk about it. So one of the things you don't want to expose, basically I'm going to take away all the things that you would say that will not get you the money, and what's left is the stuff you will say that gets you the money. So that's why we're going through these pitfalls. Knowing something that is wrong is much more dangerous than not knowing anything at all. What a lot of people do in these VC meetings or these pitch meetings is they'll say something about their potential product, their potential customers, that's just flat out wrong. And remember, they're not your mom. I'm not your mom in the VC meeting, so I'm not going to say, wow, that's categorically false. Like, some examples. There's no competition to the thing that I'm talking about. Well, clearly the world has survived without the thing that you're talking about. So maybe it's not a competing company doing the exact same thing you're doing, but there is competition in an existing platform, service, or alternative path. And you need to understand that. So even if you think there's really no competition, that's a very narrow-minded and ignorant way of looking at the problem, usually a red flag. Like this person's not thinking this through, or really there's no competition. Everything has competition. There's always an alternative, because otherwise the world would not be here. The alternative might be no one gives a shit about your thing because we've managed to survive without it. So, and this comes out of basically deep-seated ignorance about how to explain what you're doing. One of the simple ideas is, this is a bit out of order, sorry, is if you don't know something, before you go meet with your VCs or as you're putting your pitch together, maybe explore it. So for example, pricing, simple thing to talk about. A lot of people say, well, we're not really sure how to price our product yet. Really? You've left your real job, you're putting all this effort into this, and you don't know how to price the thing? Could you go talk to some potential customers and go through a process with them about how to price it. That's actually a very elaborate thing. I could spend like 2 hours talking about how to talk to customers pre-product to get information out of them. You basically, you can't ask the customer how much you're willing to pay because they might say $1. You have to kind of walk them through a bunch of cases, do a binary tree search, do this iteratively over a bunch of different people, get one data point and then combine them. Like, would you be willing to pay $500? No. Would you be willing to pay $250? Well, the person's already tainted by the $500, so they might say yes, but it's not a valid data point. So that's in a nutshell, the process you have to go through. But pricing is just one thing. There's every other aspect of your product or how you're going to implement it with customers that you need to ask. And so you kind of have to go through this rather tiresome scientific method to go through and learn these things before you pitch anything to a VC, right? Just having the best gizmo doesn't get you anywhere. It really doesn't. And saying, I have the best gizmo, I'll figure out how to price it later. I'll figure out how to what my initial target market is later. It doesn't fly. Don't waste your time talking to VCs about that. Because at the end of the day, they need to make money. Remember the riskless win? If they don't know how they're going to make money, you're wasting your time with VCs. They don't want to invest in technology, pure technology. They don't want to invest in pure teams. Those are starting points and barriers, but not worth a VC meeting at that time. And a lot of people will say, a lot of, highbrow tech-centric entrepreneurs will say, well, how am I don't know. I don't like talking to people. I don't know how much to charge. That's like so base. Okay, maybe, but that's a critical point of the VC process. Another important lesson with meeting VCs is learning how to listen. And also this actually applies to that customer process that I was just talking about. A lot of times in meetings, a VC may offer feedback and then be argued with. Don't argue with VC. You're not going to change his mind. You've already blown it. It's okay. You move on. There are other VCs. But what you can get out of the meeting at that point is, well, wait a second. What is this person? Is it something that I said? I won't say that next time. I'll say something different. Is it something that I'm not saying that I need to say? I'll figure out what it is for next time. So what you need to do is say, all right, well, why do you think that? Like for example, I'm doing LiDAR chips. There's so many examples. I have to pick one. I'm doing LiDAR chips and people will say, oh, when would you be able to sell to automotives? Well, I'm not actually funded to go to automotives. I'm never going to sell LiDAR chips to automotives. That's like a 5-year process and I'm going to get to market in 2 years. Oh, the only scalable path to revenue in LiDAR is automotive. So if you can't get to automotive, I can't possibly think about investing. That's a very fair point. But then I start asking questions. Okay, why is automotive the only thing? What are your thresholds for scale? Why do you think scale is important? And you basically can iterate and figure that out. So the next meeting I have, somewhere in the process, I clearly explain before the person gets to that conclusion, or break down that idea before we get to the fun part of the meeting, or I explain, you may have thought that before I started talking, but if you're like that other guy, I'm going to explain how that's not true. And so then that meeting may end, oh, I had thought that automotive was the only path to scale for your particular product, but now I see it's much more granular than that. So you go to one meeting, you fail, you listen, you don't get defensive, you don't argue, but you ask, because if you argue, I don't want to talk to you. If you tell me I'm wrong, I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm talking about, you might be right, but I don't want to talk to you anymore. So don't do any of that. Milk me for information. If I'm the VC, say, oh, why do you think that? Why do you think this idea will fail? I get that a lot too, by the way. There were some funny OFEF companies early in this process where they would go and meet with critical customers and say, would you like to use our product, sell our product, license our product? And the person would say, no, I don't. And then the OFEF entrepreneur left the meeting. They flew all the way from San Francisco to Baltimore to meet with this client. Then they left the meeting. They called me out of the meeting. They said no. Well, why no? I didn't ask. Wait, what? You didn't? I gave you a whole list of questions to ask. Well, they said no right at the beginning, so I didn't ask all the questions. Don't do that. Okay, that's, if you go to a meeting, you ask. You don't argue, but you ask. Okay. And then one thing is don't listen too much. If somebody says you're a loser, you should give up. I'm not saying you should listen to that far. You have to have an internal moral compass about how to interpret feedback. Another quick thing, which I don't think is a problem anymore, but maybe 5 years ago at CMU was a big problem, is that the idea is everything. The idea is almost nothing. Here's a diagram out of a book from MIT, actually, I think. Sorry, Dave, got to write this book so I can, yeah. But the idea, you need an idea, but there's like, some people have 50 great ideas before breakfast, and it's really about all the things that you do to connect an idea to a successful business. You don't have to copy this. I can send you this book. I just stole it from Bill O'Leary's book. And this is just one set of ideas. But like when we're evaluating ideas or pitches, well, that's a great idea. Is this the right team to do it? Is there a market for that right now? Is the product going to be definable or executable on the amount of runway? What does the runway look like? And is this company fundable through multiple series of fundraisings, especially if you're doing early stage stuff, right? It's unlikely you're going to be a massively profitable or publicly traded company on your first $5 million or $10 million check. The 10 million, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So the VCs are looking at it is, how is this company demonstrating that they're going to be able to get that next check so that I don't get on good terms, so that I don't get diluted down. By the way, something I forgot to say, I should probably mention this. You do understand that a VC fund is like a mechanism for making people with money more money, right? Like some people don't realize this because they caught up in the hype and they're, people try to become celebrities as VCs, but really, so I used to work in the military or in the military R&D world. And, I flew with Army pilots a lot. And, we were flying in helicopters. We were flying in fast moving, dangerous, complicated machines, very close to the ground. People weren't shooting at us, but sometimes they do. And I thought that was amazing. But in the rank of military pilots, Army combat pilots are pretty close to the bottom. You've got naval carrier, aviation operations combat pilots. They're at the top. And then you've got other non-combat things on aircraft carriers. They're like second. And there's this whole roster, take like the 30 different categories of pilots in the military. And Army combat pilots, as cool as they are pretty close to the bottom of the list. Even cargo flights for the Air Force to Afghanistan and a C-5, that's cooler if you're at the bar with the pilots than the pilots I'm flying with. VCs are kind of like at the bottom of the financial roster list. If you were really smart and talented, you would be in bond trading or private equity or something like that. Like early stage VCs, as famous and as cool as they may seem, are pretty close to the bottom of the list. They're trying to take other people's money, invest it in you, and make more money. Just want you to think about that, because like when you're going to meetings, don't be intimidated. Like that's the process. Where am I? I have this slide. Oh yeah, quick thing about, back to the other thing about the product. So also from Bill O'Leary's book, which is a good read, by the way, I highly recommend it. It's poorly written and has terrible examples, but I like the structure of it. It helps you walk you through your idea and make sure you filled in all the different gaps, which I certainly don't have time doing this talk. But the interesting thing about his, there, is that the product, when you get to the VC meeting, this is not about the VC meeting, this is about your product lifecycle, but there's all these other things about beachhead, identifying a beachhead market and figuring out your pricing and sales strategy. All of those things happen before you even start to build the minimum viable product. I'm not sure you can all see this on the screen when it's shared, but if you go look at the picture on the book. And so all of these questions represented in these boxes, COCA is cost of customer acquisition. These are things you need to know or have estimated or have a forecast, or at least have a decision tree about how you're going to get there before you bother to take your first VC meeting. Nothing to do with the product, right? We could be talking about selling cheese or selling science fiction, spy equipment. Doesn't matter. You would still need to have all these answers before you even bother pulling up slides of the product. Okay, and how you organize the pitch is different, but just keep in mind, you need the answers to these or you're not really necessarily going to win the VC. Sooner or later, maybe not meeting one, definitely by meeting 3, you'll have to provide an answer for all these previous 21 questions. This one's really funny. So a lot of times I'll actually be meeting with people and they really can't describe the product very well. Being able to describe your product succinctly and quickly, or your service or whatever it is, without a very long story, without an excessive number of abstract words, is kind of critical. A lot of different approaches, especially when things get really abstract. Maybe stories work. You can tell a story about this hypothetical person who's worried about losing their job. And your problem makes it so that they don't have to lose their job. That's always good. But however you tackle it, you need to be able to describe your product. And so one of the funny things about describing products I've learned is that people will describe things like, I've got this dashboard, it's a service, it's a toolkit, and customers love it when they can change the color palette, or it has night mode. Now there's something called night mode, right? Like LinkedIn and GitHub, everything has night mode. So at night it changes colors. Okay, Nobody's going to sign up for your product because it has night mode. They might not abandon your product as quickly because it has night mode. So there's this idea of grabbers versus holders. Has anyone, there's only 4 people, at least people on the screen, I think, but any of you ever heard this term, grabbers versus holders? Really? Okay, critical term. I actually learned it really awkwardly when I was pitching one of my earlier startups to a VC. But it's an obvious idea when someone explains it to you. So grabbers are the reason somebody signs up for your product. It makes you better looking or taller or whatever, solves flatulence. Those are the reasons that people grab for your product. The fact that the packaging is nice and small, or the fact that I can buy it conveniently in the stores, or whatever other aspect about the process that is not the main reason, is a holder. Don't ever talk about holders with VCs. Who the fuck cares? Nobody cares. Sorry for bad language. Talk about grabbers. Think about your product, think about all the things you're saying about your product or service, and segment it and have the first grabber, the second grabber, the third grabber. You probably don't need more than that. People will stop listening. If you haven't won me by the third grabber, probably not using your product. So it's up to you to be able to describe your product in 3 bullet points. I know that sounds really crass and pejorative, but it's just true. And the product, the grabber might be very abstract. Like Facebook might be connect with people you love. Everybody wants to connect. That sounds nice. Is it true? Not relevant, but you still need to describe your product in at least in 3 aspirational grabbers. And things that I can use it from my phone or my computer desktop, that's a holder, right? That's not critical to the thing. So think about grabbers versus holders. It's probably the most useful thing I've learned in 30 years of, or 20 years of entrepreneurship. Yeah, here's where I explain these things. I actually honestly forgot that there were like these slidey things. So the whole, yeah, okay, I didn't do that. Another quick lesson to help win over the VCs is explaining what you're doing, explaining your plans as goals, not events. So when you're actually running a startup, what's important to you? Well, getting the next version of the product ready for my next customer, or hiring another 2 people for the team so we can actually pull off this plan. These are important things. I'm not trying to say these are not important things, but you're really just explaining how you're going to spend other people's money. You're not connecting those things when you explain them like that. Like, what are you gonna do with this fundraise? Well, by the end of the quarter, we'll hire 3 more people. And please connect that to my riskless win opportunity. So what you want to talk about are not how many people you're gonna hire until someone asks. It's really much less important. You're gonna talk about instead, in 4 months, we'll have our first onboarding experience. In 6 months, we'll have 3 more customers onboarded, and we'll have our first, closed terms on a paid client in 7 months. And here's the hockey puck revenue forecast that we hope to accomplish. So yes, by end of year, I'll have 20 people on staff spending your money to hire them. Thank you very much. But that's not the primary thing. The primary thing is VCs are going to give you money, and then you're going to launch the product on some time frame, get customers and revenue by some time frame, and that's how they see how this is a riskless win. Well, not a riskless win, but some kind of win for me. Then they'll say, well, how many people are you going to hire? Let's talk about your budget and forecast. Let's make sure all that's realistic. So of course you need to know how many people you're going to hire and what those other product milestones are from a deliverable time frame. You need to know them, but that's not what you talk about. You talk about the goals and the milestones. Okay. Basically, how are you going to make that VC money? Hiring 3 people, you're just talking about spending my money. I know this sounds really weird because you're nodding your heads, but I can't explain how many meetings I go to where it's like, after close, we'll hire 7 people in 6 months. Well, first of all, that's ridiculous because how do you know how many you're going to, that's just hiring is so hard. How can you possibly predict that? And I'm like, so, and they go, what do you mean so? I've hired 6 people. And I have to literally spell it out for them. So just important lesson there too. One way to stay focused on these things is, or by these things, I mean specifically, one way to stay focused on presenting your idea and your story in a way that investors care about is to, even right now, like to say before you've actually successfully fundraised on your current pitch, is to write what you think the pitch would look like if things go well, meaning you raise money when you expect to raise money, you build the team and product the way you expect, and then you get to some other point in the future where you might think about raising money. What does that pitch look like? write that pitch now. You don't have to put all the fancy graphics and everything in it, but you should have like the slides, the outline, the things. And of course, you know, you're not going to know exactly what let's suppose you have revenue between now and then. You don't know what it's going to be, but you know what you'd like it to be. You'd know what it should be if you wanted to successfully raise money. You can even test that idea. You can test the idea by pitching the hypothetical pitch to some friendly people and say, what do you think of this pitch? If I make this 10 million, is the 10 million going to work, or does it need to be 20? You know, you can actually test these ideas ahead of time. You can really do a great job. It might even be easier because it's so hypothetical in building the N+1 pitch. Now, to be fair, I had this idea all by myself in isolation a long time ago. And then I discovered it's a perfectly common idea. Everyone talks about this idea. Reid Hoffman, like 10 years ago, wrote a beautiful blog post with this idea, which you can look up. That's still my favorite blog post of the idea, but everybody has regurgitated this idea. But it's a really important idea, which a lot of people don't know about. So as you're writing a pitch and you're trying to figure out what is going to really drive a VC to think this is great, you've got some slide in there about future stuff. Go ahead and write that future pitch. Because not only will that help you write the current pitch, it will also help you explain your story because you've had to think it out a little bit more. But most importantly, after you successfully raise money, based on all the great advice I've given you here, it will help you stay focused on what you need to do. Obviously, the N+1 pitch can change. You're free to change it, but at least you have a starting point about how you're going to morph it. Oh, and then the N+1 pitch also feeds directly into this, because after you raise the money, this being how to stay focused, after you raise the money, you know what you're working towards. Raising money is actually the easy part. Building real value after you raise someone else's money is actually the hard part. So as much effort it goes into raising money, let's not forget, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is your startup succeeding. And to do that, since every startup is underfunded and overworked, there's no exception. There's really no exception. I have a lot of funny stories about that. No matter how successful some other startup looks outside, if you go talk to the people there, you'll realize that behind the scenes, it's just as scared and strapped and stressful as yours. And how do you do that? Well, if you already have a clear outline for what you need to accomplish for that successful next raise, it makes it a lot easier. And that's really it. That's all I got. That's the end of the pitch. I did it really fast because I had the slides.
So how much of this did you actually use in raising your seed round at Voyant?
All of it.
Do you eat your own dog?
Yeah. Yeah. And well, you kind of have to. So some of these things, if I go backwards, so the N+1 pitch, because we're doing semiconductor hardware where you literally have to plan things out years in advance, like it's not an accident that Intel and AMTD and all these companies plot out what they need to do years in advance, because it's kind of like a car company, right? I mean, you need to really have the tooling for the products you're going to make 3 years from now. Like it takes that long to build a car factory or to build a supply chain for a car. Similar for semiconductors, even though they're so tiny and so small. And so building an early stage semiconductor company, even though it's fabless, is terrifying because we're totally underfunded and under-resourced in every possible way, but we still need to have a 3-year plan. So we've already mapped out in detail what our 2022 chips have to look like to be successful, and to a less defined level, the 2023 chips. And so we're already working with our fabs now, how we're going to build those 2023 chips as well as the 2022 chips. So we're literally spending money now on what we need to finish in 2023. And of course that feeds into our pitch. Like I literally have a block diagram of this is like what we have now, but the next chip will have this, and the next chip will have this. And here's the direct connection between that block diagram and the performance of the devices. And here's the customer sets that grow based on improving performance of these chips. So yeah, but I'm not sure. I had it in the beginning on other stupider companies where it was all like, oh, if we just get to 1 million eyeballs, we win, in a vague sort of way. Oh, like Bitly, for example. I was the CEO of a social media company. And when I took that company over, I didn't start it, but I worked there. The idea was, well, we have a lot of data. We have a lot of social media data. We have a lot of cookies. We have a lot of this like Facebook-like data, and we're not Facebook. And there's gold in that data. That was the idea. Tested that idea with some fundraising, which you had to raise money. It didn't go anywhere. So we had to work really hard to understand, like, what's the gold in the data? We have to make up some examples. We have to extract the gold, at least hypothetically. And that idea, by the way, was interesting to the board. The board just assumed, the early investors who'd pumped $30 million in this company on the idea that the data is money. I was like, the data is not money. There's no one willing to pay us any money for the data. Like, give me a specific plan for turning the data into money and I will follow it. But you guys have no plan. You put $30 million in this company without a clue how it's going to make any money. So that was interesting. This is definitely tested. I learned this the hard way from like raising money for one of my earlier companies, like about 15 years ago. This is also that same company, learned that the hard way. And the product was successful, by the way. We got to 1 million users. Like, eventually Facebook bought the company. It was a great deal for everybody. Our shareholders were very happy. But we did a terrible job explaining the product in the early days. Terrible, simply terrible. So that was learned the hard way. Let's see. This I just know. Yes. And by the way, technically, I'm not a co-founder of Voyant. Like, just, you introduced me as the co-founder of Voyant, but the founders are two amazing scientists from Columbia, and I just jumped on when I was needed for the ride, to be fair. I don't want to take credit for, I mean, I love working there. I'm not dissing the guys, but. Yeah.
Your message early on in this presentation was keep it simple, right? And that's probably what the investors in that social media company bought into, simpler message. At which point is somebody responsible for the sophistication behind the symbol?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know if there's there's money in that data is a fact. Like, you got to keep the facts simple, the statements, but at the end of the day, they have to be facts or testable hypotheses at least. And the company, when I took it over, had never made any money. There was no actual money in the data. They just took it as faith. It was a faith-based investment. And so that's not, it's just not about simple. Like it's really simple to say that the tides are caused by Apollo, but that's not true. So simple and true, it has to be a true, simple fact, not a true, simple falsehood or a made up idea. So that's a difference between simplicity and truth.
Well, I mean, it's like we're seeing the SPAC market right now. A year and a half ago, everybody's SPAC's the way to go. Now SPAC is hell, right?
Wait, why are now SPACs hell? Don't tell me that. What do you mean? So that's true. So
a couple companies in the SPAC process right now.
Oh yeah, so do I.
Because the tight market is dry. The point is that 20 years ago, everybody said there was value in the data. Everyone.
Right.
The VCs invested on that premise. So,
but so for example, if you were DoubleClick or Facebook and you said there's value in the data, let me show you the value. Here's my internal marketing engine, and you see people bidding on keywords, and I'm making $50 million a day right now, and people buying whatever keywords to sell products to people. It's a simple statement, and it's backed up with a bunch of data or a slide or truth or a real business thing. In the case that I'm talking about, it was just a statement. No work had been done to experiment on the statement, to demonstrate the statement. No customers had been spoken to see, hey, is there something I could do with my data that you're willing to pay for? All that came after they had raised $30 million. So that's the difference, I guess.
I agree with you.
Oh, okay.
I'm not trying to be.
No, I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear.
I'm just trying to accentuate.
Oh yeah, no, there's totally this world. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. There's totally this world, which I think hopefully has ended. And this used to be a dichotomy between East Coast and West Coast. East Coast and West Coast investors. Where on the West Coast, it was a West Coast investment, faith-based investment idea to invest in a social media company because it might have lots of eyeballs. And that was the wording used. So I'm just gonna write a check and it could work out because they'll get a lot of eyeballs. And then the East Coast people would be like, okay, I know you got eyeballs, that's great, but then how are you gonna convert the eyeballs into money? And the West Coast people didn't care and the East Coast people did. And so you're right, like it was a simple idea for West Coast people. It would totally be sufficient for West Coast investors, but not necessarily for East Coast investors. And this is obviously a stereotype that I'm using here. I'm not saying that this is totally true, but that's just how people describe it. Like the West Coast people were more, and maybe still are, I don't really know, aspirationally focused on their early stage investments. but the East Coast people still need revenue projections, and then they still want you to do work to maybe test those revenue projections. For example, if you think your initial target price is going to, or your initial product price is going to be, X dollars for feature set Y, can you have us talk to some customers that you've pitched that to? Oops. No, I've never even put together a sales presentation, much less actually bothered with all the work necessary to track down some customers and get them to commit to that, much less work those customers to the point where they're willing to talk to you about it, because then they feel like there's some kind of obligation. So these are like the kind of work that a real VC is expecting you to do before you meet with them, usually. And it's rather straightforward work compared to the risk of like quitting your job to do a startup. So it's always surprising, although hardly uncommon, when I'm in a meeting and afterwards I'm talking with the partners and I'm saying, so explain to me who even the customer is for this product and what they're willing to pay for something. Like, what are we actually talking about here? That's always in a kind of an awkward conversation. And maybe you can get away with it. Like, maybe you don't need any of that stuff. Maybe you don't need to think about what you're going to charge your product, what the product is from a definite point of view, what the sales pitch looks like for the product. You might not need it. It depends on your early stage. But I think it could help. I would do it. I would just make it up and then go talk to some customers. Like, if you think you're going to sell something to an oil company, like, by the way, big companies, little companies, medium companies love to talk to startups because they don't know about this whole pilot ranking thing. And so startups might be like the silliest little thing on the planet, but also a really good mechanism for actually making real change and value. Maybe the only true path for creating real value. But everyone always wants to talk to a startup. So you can, if it's a public product that you would sell to other people, you could go to, I have a whole pile of these ideas for like guerrilla testing a product market fit. If it's a consumer thing, go hang out at Starbucks, offer to people, give people $1 or buy them a coffee. If they'll talk to you for 5 minutes about your product, would you use my flatulence pill? I would charge $5, that kind of thing. And if it's a big company or meeting company, like, you can probably get contacts to these companies and say, hey, I'm building a virtual simulator for fashion design. So you don't have to, you can photograph the models naked and then put any kind of clothing you want on them after you give me the clothing, and I'll do a virtual model of it. And so, well, do you actually call any advertising companies? Do you actually call anything in the ecosystem to validate that? The answer, so I work, I'm like a venture partner in 2 different places, but both of them are really, really early stage. So it's expected that this founder should not have done that. But when they do, it's incredibly surprising and refreshing and rewarding. But usually we then call the customers, do a half-assed job explaining what we think the product is, because we don't really know the grabbers. And then we talk to our customers or the potential customers, and they tell us, yes, no, I would never use that. And usually there's gold in that conversation. Usually there's a friction or benefits to the adoption of that product or service that the founder is not even aware of because they never bothered to have the conversation in a useful way. So for example, there was this ophthalmology or optometry. Okay, I forget the different words. This is what happens when you look at thousands of businesses in a year. You forget words. But like, there's the eye surgeon and then the person at the eye doctor who just measures your eyes for glasses, right? And this person had a genius way of completely automating the bottom one. Is that optometry? Do you guys know? Yeah. Ophthalmology, that's the words. So this was an ophthalmology killer. Ophthalmologists who hate dealing with ophthalmologists, like the surgeons, hated dealing with these people. They would totally adopt the service, but they're a small in number. The other lower people, ophthalmologists, they hated the idea, even though they agreed it could work, but that puts them out of a job. So they hated the idea, and this entrepreneur wanted to sell to them. And we realized long before he did that that was a loser's game. Remember, didn't matter if the team was great, they were awesome, the technology was perfect, they already worked it out really well. It was completely unsellable in the scheme that they had designed. And so these are the things that you don't learn if you don't actually talk to customers and get that N+1 pitch ready and actually do all the homework necessary to fuel that. I mean, it sounds stupid, but it happens all the time. So like, really? He didn't know that? And again, you have to remember the context of the conversations. Nobody wants to give you bad feedback. You know, he had asked a bunch of these people, do you like my product? And they said, yes, I love it. He didn't ask, he never asked this, when will you buy it and how much will you pay for it? If he had asked those questions, they would have said, oh, never. I love it. It's genius. I'm never buying it. It would put me out of a job. The sandwich robot guy. Here's another example. What? Oh, I don't want to say any names because now I feel bad. But BistroBot, we were helping BistroBot in OFF investment. Lovely guy, had a robot that made sandwiches, could be more than a gimmick, could really change like the food industry in a lot of different ways. But he ended up pitching all the wrong people. He ended up pitching people that want to make sandwiches. So for example, I got him an introduction at a large convenience chain, and not Wayne Wawa. And he should have pitched one set of people that want to optimize the business and save costs and improve product. Instead, he let himself get funneled down to the people in charge of the kitchen where they make the sandwiches. The guy in charge of the kitchen where they make sandwiches, the last thing he wants is a robot that makes the sandwiches, because he loves his 100 people who make sandwiches. His level of importance is a function of how many people he manages, not in how many sandwiches he makes. Right? You got to think about who am I pitching? What is the value here? Is this the right person? Is this the sales decision? This is another top of the iceberg for a very long conversation that first-time entrepreneurs usually get wrong. But is the person I'm pitching really the decision maker for my product? Or does my product displace this person or make this person fearful or irrelevant? Automation, which comes out of Carnegie Mellon a lot, is usually really scary, right? It helps somebody, but maybe not the person you want to meet with or the person you're actually meeting with. So in this particular robot sandwich case, it was really sad because he left that meeting. The guy's like, I never want to hear from you again. I don't want your robot machine. And I'm going to quickly call the bosses and say it doesn't work at all. And this is terrible. And don't ever talk to these people again, which is exactly what happened. All that business, that could have been a great business. Mismatch in ideas or product market fit. Is this helpful?
Yes.
Because like, I mean, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. I can go on this forever. Like, I don't know. Just maybe asking another question then, because I don't.
Okay. Yeah, I'll ask a question about the social media company. Like
Oh, please don't.
What's that?
Okay, go ahead.
I don't know.
No, you can't. No, I'm thick. It's painful, but it's been a long time. I can deal with it.
You mentioned that there was the assumption that there was gold in the social media data.
And there was eventually a little bit gold,
Yeah,
little nodules.
What was your process of like building the technology or like finding how did you find it so that Facebook valued the ultimate position, right?
So it wasn't even about, mining the data. It took minutes, right? I mean, it was like, that's not, well, whatever. That was pretty straightforward to build the mining systems to measure things. The hard part was basically building product concepts, like going to talk to customers about their needs. What do you need? How do you work with Facebook? How do you work with Twitter? How do you use their data? What products do you need? Do you care about this? Do you care about that? Do you care about this? And a lot of the answers were surprising. And a lot of the answers were maybe obvious, but nobody at the company ever thought to ask the questions before. And so then from that, we built this dashboard essentially. And I hate using the word dashboard, but it was basically a like customer understanding machine, to try to put it into words like what you're doing. It was a customer understanding machine that helped customers or our clients understand their user base in a way that they couldn't. Or it might have been as simple as, we'll pay you $20,000 a month just to cross-check the data that Twitter and Facebook are giving us, because that data is completely wrong. And we would help them find anomalies in customer data of those things. But then there were also novel ideas, such as we can help you target customers who are attracted to some kind of keyword. Or because we knew, we were cooking everybody just like everybody is. And early on, there were other companies doing this in different ways, but we could basically say this customer, just based on the traffic, we've using machine learning, we've quantified every single website out there, just like everybody has. And we know this is a blog about NASCAR. And this person goes to NASCAR, they go to this tire site, and then they go to Amazon. If you want to sell tires, target this cookie on Amazon. And so we built this engine like that, which was a novel idea, and people paid us whatever, $50,000 a month to use that engine to target their ads better. So there was data in there, there was gold in that data, but it took a lot of customer interactions, and sometimes the interactions were not at all what you expected. So for example, I don't mention these people by name because they're so jerky. Condé Nast is like this huge magazine and online empire at the time. They might be out of business by now. And I went to the sales meeting and we explained how we could help you cross-reference key articles that your audience would like to keep people reading within your conglomerate, right? Like if this person's reading a National Geographic traveler article about X, let's also send them to the Condé Nast Traveler about something that's related to X. And we can completely automate that for you. You're already putting up the supported related articles. How about we just help you expand that? Turns out, and this is not obvious, that Condé Nast was not, and this is all 10 years ago, right? So I don't know what it is now, but it was not a company. It was like middle-aged Europe with a bunch of competing baronies, and they all wanted to tear each other down. So the last thing a Condé Nast barony is going to do is send traffic or again, send any kind of revenue potential to the competing ones. Right? That's like, you wouldn't think that, but that's how it was. So as soon as we got to that part of the meeting, it's like, oh, you're all competing against each other. There's no synergy. You get no value out of helping each other. And I literally got up and said, well, this is great. Let's go. And my head of sales was upset. We can't leave. We're only 10 minutes in the meeting. I'm like, it doesn't matter. There's nothing we can offer these people that makes any sense. Good luck, guys. That's terrible. Should I call the CEO? I don't need stock in this. I don't care. So there's a bunch of, you learn by talking to customers every single time. The ophthalmologist example, the Condé Nast example, like you always learn from these experiences. And I would recommend you learn them before you make your first VC pitch. And maybe you already have, like, this might be out of date. I mean, you guys are all professional people, but there are many, many entrepreneurs that I deal with that have never spoken to a customer, not from like a sales pitch point of view, just like the friendly mommy sort of conversation. Like, do you like my product? Yes, I love your product. Yay. That's not really valuable from a VC pitch point of view. I spoke to my mom. She really loves my deck. Well, that's great.
There'd be something wrong if she didn't do that.
Maybe a really honest mom. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. How had that hand raised? Go ahead.
Hi, Peter. Yeah, I'm Mike. I'm building a computer vision company that for driving safety. My question is about what you said.
Vision company.
Can you hear me?
Say again.
Yeah. So
yes.
My question is about. Okay, great. So my question is about what you said about N+1 pitch. So preparing for the next step. So for my company, we probably won't need funding until much later next year. But I'd like to start building a connection to VC. And how would you recommend that to reach out to find people who's interested in talking for this early engagement?
Oh gosh, talk to Dave. That's a really good question and a really hard question to answer. And it's definitely a good question to ask because the process with engaging a VC, if you start from scratch, is maybe something like unless you're something super hot that happens to hit their theme right when you contact them, it might be a 10-week, 14-week process just to get that first meeting, unless if it's a cold introduction. So you definitely want to think ahead and plan things early and have a network of VCs to pitch when you're ready to raise money. Cold calling usually doesn't work. Like reaching out on the website directly is very poor, even though that website looks like it's designed to collect the ideas. Because if the idea isn't pre-vetted, then they get a lot of stupid ideas, right? So they don't have time to look through the entire filter of ideas. So I'd recommend, if it's a cold call, I'd recommend trying to get the person on LinkedIn. Ideally, you have to do a lot of work. I mean, not ideally, you have to do a lot of work researching the firm, looking at their portfolio. Don't read the words on the website because they're all vague and aspirational and at the end of the day, irrelevant. Look at their portfolio. Think if you are like something in their portfolio or like the thesis as demonstrated by their portfolio, but not too similar to their portfolio in that you're actually competitive. If you're competitive, either clearly or we like to think of it at LDV as like one step away, or at least one step away. So if our company fails at their core mission and then they pivot to an adjacent market, is that still clear of any other investments? We're not going to accept any other investments in something we think of as an adjacent market. So make sure you're not in an adjacent market or distinctive enough that you can pitch that you are not. Obviously, everything could be the same in some abstract way of looking at it. And then if you think that firm is a good fit, because remember, this is a waste of your time too, if you're making the wrong decision, then I would basically call Dave, call someone find some connection to the firm, reach out on LinkedIn and reach out on their direct website as well. Keep in mind that the process of first introduction, Remember, every VC firm wants to be your friend. A normal VC meeting will go well. You'll leave the meeting thinking, oh, that was a great meeting. Those people were lovely. They really liked me. That's their job. I mean, on average, VCs are rather attractive. They're tall. They have nice hair. If you meet like a shrunken, overweight, like nasty looking VC, they're probably a really good VC. Quite honestly, like Reid Hoffman, he must be amazing. But the key process is you usually start out with an associate. The associate then goes to this is important because you need to understand the timing. The associate will then go to the next Monday, Tuesday meeting, bring up the idea. The partner, a managing partner, if they like the idea, will then tell the associate to go get more information. The point is there's like 2 or 3 rounds of the associate gathering information on you before you get to the real meeting where you get to meet with the partner. And all those meetings are all lovely. They all should go to really well. I mean, you're going to get positive, nothing but glaringly positive feedback, how interested they are, how thankful they are for your time. If they're professional. I mean, some people are jerky, but most of them are professional. And so you've got 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of pre-meetings before you're anywhere. Meetings with associates are nowhere. They're literally nowhere. And so it's only when you meet with a partner that things start to get real. And so this process at best is 6 weeks, more likely 14 weeks. And then you still don't have a term sheet because then there's more due diligence. So my point is in my personal investments, or well, in everything that I do, I assume 6 months from starting the process to finishing the process and having money in the bank. 6 months. So you don't wait till you have 2 months left. Like that's terrifying. Don't do that. You start the process 6 months before you need the money. And look, if I'm wrong, you don't have as much white hair as I do. But I'm usually right about that. It's usually 6 months. And I know how to do this. I've raised money for early stage companies, I don't know, at least 6 times like firsthand. I mean, I know how this works. And it still always works out to be 5 months and 6 days at best. So just keep that in mind. And also the other thing to think about is don't meet with one VC. If you're going to meet with VCs and do all this work, you're going to have to meet with a lot. I mean, I think Dave always says, if you haven't met with 100 VCs, you haven't even started yet. That's pretty much true. To raise the money we raised for Voyant, I think I reached out to I was on a Trello spreadsheet. That's like something like we reached out to 120, took about 83 meetings. 40 people said, no, thank you, without even taking the meeting. That's very efficient. I'd rather not let them waste my time. And so that was like 83 contacts. Many of those were multiple meetings. So literally hundreds of meetings to close that money. It takes a long time to schedule. Let's see, probably like triple meeting, like 240 meetings or calls. Thankfully, it was during a pandemic, so I didn't have to actually go anywhere. But 240 meetings over 5 months and 6 days to close the $14 million. That's kind of the numbers. So if you have like 3 meetings and you get nowhere, you're not getting. I mean, yeah, of course you're gonna get nowhere.
Got it.
It's really,
Okay,
it's not to say it's disturbing. It's hard. It's really depressing to have a meeting knowing you have a less than 1% chance of closing money from that meeting, but you don't know I don't know how to figure out which meetings to take.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Are these any difference between funding rounds and funding sources?
Well, no. I mean, usually by the time you see, you probably have a good idea of your grabbers versus holders through trial and error or blind luck, like you've been self-selected. So you've solved them by Series C, one way or the other. But no, essentially no. For example, I was talking to the way back when, again, this is another like 7-year-old example. I can't really use current examples because the people might still be alive. But I was talking to the CFO of a major social media company that was hugely successful and would eventually be incredibly successful at their Series F financing. And they were complaining about how hard it was to pitch this amazingly successful social media company. So they were complaining about how hard it was. Now, granted, they're trying to raise like $100 million and I was trying to raise 10 at the time, but still, they're this amazing brand. Everyone's heard of this company. Everyone uses this company, and they thought the fundraising process was hard. So no, it seems to always be a constant. Now look, some companies are super hot and people want in and you get this momentum going and somebody famous is investing, so everybody else wants to invest. And then you can throw this whole idea out the window. You are on the gravy train. Don't worry about any of this shit. It's going to work out for you. But I think there are a lot of very powerful companies out there that could succeed if they knew how to raise money, that deserve to succeed. that aren't necessarily in that unicorn zone, but just don't know how to raise money. They just don't know how to talk to VCs. They don't know how to explain their product. They don't know how to explain their plans, not because their plans and products aren't lovely, just because they've never put the thought into how to explain them to people who have other opportunities. Because that's what it's down to, right? Like when you talk to customers, when you talk to yourself, you're in it, or you wouldn't be listening to this conversation. When you talk to investors, they have an opportunity cost. Like they have like 50 different companies they want to meet with that week. You're one of the 50. How do you stand out? How do you make yourself more professional, more realistic, more practical, a better riskless outcome for them? That's what it's about, you know? And so when you meet with customers, they have alternatives. They have your competing products. Am I out of here? You pulling the plug? Oh, that's right.
No, you're fine. You're keep going.
Oh.
I'm just saying 1:30 people tend to have to go to.
That's
the
fine.
next
I don't know
meeting,
what time. Is it
so-
98 minutes?
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Oh, it's 1:30. I'm so sorry.
Don't be sorry. Thank you. You have another question? You can ask him afterwards. Yeah. So thank you all for joining us online today, and may the Schwartz be with you all.